Hello, everyone. We're here with Hunter Glenn to present on Your Feelings Are Not Your Fault, mostly. And this is based on an article he wrote for Intentional Insights, which is available on intentionalinsights.org, and we'll also be linking it to the video at the bottom. And he'll be talking about this topic. This is part of the broader offerings at Intentional Insights on how to improve your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to reach your goals. More broadly, Intentional Insights is an organization that helps people improve their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to reach their goals in order to help individual people have better lives and in order to help our society be less screwed up through people making better decisions in social, political, and civic settings. All right, now I turn it over to Hunter to give a TED-style presentation. And go ahead, Hunter, please share your thoughts.
I want to talk to you today about 3 phases of my life. I moved from the first to the second with one insight, and then from the second to the third. If you were to rate how much responsibility you take for your feelings, first phase at 100%, moved down to 0%, third and last stage, I take closer to 10% responsibility for my feelings. I want to give you a picture of what I mean by taking responsibility for feelings. I felt in the first stage that I should like or love everybody. Even today, I think this would be nice. But back then, in stage 1, if I liked or loved somebody, subconsciously award myself a brownie for being a good person. Alternatively, if I didn't like somebody, I would blame myself for this.
Okay, let me see if I can find it.
Feel pleasant feelings about somebody, I would chastise myself for not being a good person. I did this with feelings of like or disliking people, humble or proud, hardworking or lazy, fair or biased in my judgments. And every day, minute by minute, every feeling was an opportunity for me to judge myself. Judge myself according to what I felt. Now, it's normal in the course of life for feelings to go up and down. Feelings aren't static, they change. And those feelings are valid. But I blamed myself for any changes which I considered to be negative. As anybody, that you can't actually just choose to feel whatever you want. I suppose we could, if we could, we would choose to be happy, creative, full of energy, and productive all the time. Actually do that. You can't put your hand on a hot stove and not feel pain, and you can't go through the difficulties of life and simply not have any negative emotional reactions to it. When you blame yourself for how you feel, like I used to, then it saps your willpower. You spend all your energy trying to force yourself not to feel a certain way. Additionally, it affects your self-esteem as you judge yourself based on the fact that you have negative feelings. All of these negative consequences happen getting rid of the original negative feeling. And how do you feel when your strength's been sapped and your self-esteem has been affected? Generally sad, frustrated, weak. And that's a very dangerous place to be if you're somebody who blames themselves for how they feel. Because now you're in a low spot, and your reaction to that is to go right on and blame yourself again and bring yourself down again, subtracting more points, judging yourself more harshly. It's sort of like stubbing your toe, and then because you feel pain, to punish yourself for feeling that pain, you shoot yourself in the foot. Then you feel more pain, and go ahead and shoot yourself in the other foot, and on, going on a hunger strike until your body feels full of energy and no longer has hunger pangs. Is this: if you punish yourself for feeling punished, then you're always going to be punishing yourself and be feeling punished. If you have low self-esteem because you have low self-esteem, then you'll constantly be decreasing your self-esteem. And if you're sad because you're sad, then you'll constantly be decreasing your happiness. In my system, by blaming myself for my feelings, it was easy to have just a little trip, just a little bit of a down moment, and end up at the bottom of a cliff. Cycle where I brought myself all the way down if I started feeling negatively at all. Now this was bad enough, but can you imagine what it would have been like if I had also been depressed at the time? I would have had even less control over my feelings. They would have been generally lower, more negative than they would have been otherwise. And I would have been constantly punishing myself in this way. It would have been a harder cycle than the one I even experienced. Completely unnecessary. And entirely the work of my own hands. It was my own perspective that was leading to me punishing myself, making a self-sustaining cycle of negative feelings. I think I'm not alone at one point that I was responsible for my feelings, and that many people do this. And statistically speaking, some of them are probably depressed too. And I can only imagine how much worse that is for them. And for people in a similar circumstance to have the same change of perspective that I had. Feelings off their leash. I say that because I find it to be a good analogy to say that before, so to speak, I had an overactive, excited puppy that I was trying to control. Puppies, as they are trying to run around wherever they want to go, sometimes get themselves into trouble, getting themselves hurt, dirty, wet, cold. And so you put it on a leash and you try to control it. Unfortunately, in my case, and in general things, you can't control wherever your feelings go. They end up escaping anyway, as you strain against them anyway. And because of all the energy you spent trying to control them, you end up having nothing left over to recover from it, or to enjoy the better times of life. Eventually, you're exhausted, you just let it go, which is actually the best thing to do in that kind of circumstance. However, I let my feelings off their leash. Instead of taking 100% responsibility for what I felt, I decided to take responsibility for what I did, to what I felt, and then let my feelings be whatever they were going to be. I took responsibility for my actions and not for my feelings. So to speak, I let the puppy off its leash, amazed to find that it did not go out and get itself killed. My feelings did not spiral downward when I let go of the steering wheel. Control them. They stayed more or less about the same. I still had normal ups and downs. They still gave me good times as well as bad times, with the big difference being that now that I wasn't trying to control them, I had energy left over for other things. My focus became on how to act, shifted to recovering from the bad times instead of trying to control them, and in enjoying the good times. General result of my having let my feelings off their leash was that I had fewer negative times. They weren't as bad as they were otherwise. And I had more energy to do other things in my life, now that I wasn't worrying minute by minute what I was going to feel and whether or not I was going to have to cut myself down for it or not. Now, as big of an improvement as this was, insight, which moved me from this stage to the third one, the last, the one which I currently inhabit. You're as familiar as I am with the sayings like, look on the bright side, just have a positive attitude. Happiness is a choice. Cry, man up. These are hideous things to tell somebody suffering depression, who's really trying to control their feelings and constantly failing, than to despair, telling them that they just aren't trying hard enough, that something is wrong with them. I want to emphasize that these positive sayings are not, very often, the right thing to say to somebody. Very often, as in my case, the lesson somebody needs to learn is that their feelings are valid. And then let them go. Additionally, these sayings are better advice for how to act than how to feel. Take the right action, look on the bright side, do what you have to do, but let your feelings be whatever they are throughout it. Now, if you're at that stage, you're probably doing pretty well. When you don't blame yourself for your feelings, bad happens. But I can now say that there's still room for improvement. I recommend a bit above 0. I was too quick to come down from 100 to 0. I should have come down more to about 10. Try to have a positive attitude if we don't take it too far. And that can be good advice to give somebody. Don't, I emphasize, tell it to somebody going through something like depression or somebody who's already trying feelings. And you're not trying much to change your feelings. You have a little bit of room to work with. You can make a difference. Remember the puppy that represents our feelings. Now, I found things were much better once you let it off its leash, but I found it was better still, gossamer leash, with a single strand of spider silk. I gently guide my emotions where I like them to be. If they resist, if they pull away, they escape. The leash is not very strong, and I think that's a good thing. Then you can improve your feelings with no side effects. No problem at all. There are a lot of ways you can learn to affect your feelings with practice and with study. I know there's somebody you can look up on the internet, Alicorn, who's done a lot of work in this. She claims to be able to control her feelings of jealousy, to eliminate them, to adjust her daily happiness level, to whom she's attracted. So she has the ability, she says, to make herself like somebody at will. And I think these are great abilities. They sound a little bit like superpowers to me. And if you know how to do them, thing. I said before that you can't put your hand on a stove and not feel pain, but I suppose I have heard of people who, after many years of study, have learned ways to reduce physical pain. And I suppose that with study also, you can learn to affect your feelings. But the biggest takeaway I want to give, if you don't know how to do this, if you haven't gone through the years of training and study, like some people have, then you're not in control of your feelings. You can't simply choose not to feel a burn, or choose not to feel sad, or frustrated, or that you dislike somebody. Accept that. Let your feelings come, let them go, and simply choose how you respond to them. Then if you've relaxed and you're in a position to do so, some efforts to improve your feelings. I personally try to imagine the kind of my person, the version of myself that I'd like to be, and I try to step into that role. But if my feelings resist that and reassert themselves, I allow them to, and I continue on my life, maybe with one of the lower points. But these highs and lows are natural, and they come and they go. Alternatively, if my feelings do this attempt on my part, then I haven't lost anything by it. One person cannot change the waves of the sea. When it really comes down to it, they can make a small difference if they really wanted to. And with study and practice, they can find ways to do more. To see your feelings come and they go. It is with our heart that with study and with care and with practice, we can learn to affect it. But the biggest thing I want to remind you is not to do so if you don't know how to, but rather to relax and let those waves come and go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Hunter.
Thank you so much, Hunter.
So now I hope the audience can see why this was such a popular article. It was very popular in Intentional Insights and Psychology Today and so on. So at this point, let's open this up for conversation. So, yeah, Aaron says that he's clapping. Excellent. So let's open this up for conversation. And what I'd like to do is have folks turn off their microphones one by one if they want to comment or ask questions, and indicate in the chat that you want to ask a question so that you don't all jump at once. So whoever indicates in the chat that they want to ask a question first, just please go ahead and indicate that you want to ask a question. Anyone? Questions? I'll go first if there's no other questions from anyone else. But so, Hunter, you talked about managing your feelings and people learning how to manage their feelings. And I bet a lot of people would want to know and learn how to manage their feelings. So if you can talk a little bit about how you go from the stage of, not managing your feelings to managing your feelings, some techniques, some strategies, some tips for that, I think so folks would appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what I've learned is from the person I mentioned, Alicorn, and she has done more impressive things than anything I could name. But the principle I could suggest, which applies to just about everything, is that understanding has to come influence. You can't try to change another person before you understand them, and you can't try to change yourself before you understand yourself. So if you want to change a feeling, the first thing to do is to understand it. I have no particular expertise in any particular feeling. My usual method would just be to look things up, look up the studies on whatever it is I'm feeling, and figure out what's already been done.
So I think it would be helpful for the audience for you to share some of your experiences with what you found most useful for you, from what Alicorn and from what the other studies have found. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I think people would like to hear that.
Let me think. One example that comes to mind is with the emotion of jealousy. A lot of people think of jealousy as a negative emotion, but my understanding is that jealousy is probably coded psychologically, because it contributes to having reproductive success as anything else in evolutionary psychology. It's normal to want everybody else to want you and only you, even if you don't feel that way about other people. To get that into its perspective, when I feel a twinge of jealousy, I simply think of it in those terms. That this is something which was an appropriate response if you were trying to maximize your inclusive genetic fitness, but personally I'm not. The advice I mentioned in my talk, which is to say that I feel that emotion, I don't necessarily try to get rid of it, but I simply observe it. I don't respond to it by acting in a different way. I found that it loses power to affect me as I do this. Simply being aware of it, not responding, letting it be, and it just fades away.
All right, thank you. So I see that Aaron Tama has a question. So Aaron, can you turn on your microphone and ask the question? Yes.
Yeah, sure. I can try. My CPU is very challenged by Google Hangouts, so can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So what I wrote was not a question per se, but more of a meta question relating to all questions or information on techniques. Yeah, that if you could like state the source, like, okay, you said, for example, Alicorn, but then what is her source? Is it scientific, or did she come up with it herself and maybe made good experience with that? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's this common phenomenon where people will give specific advice about managing things like feelings. Most of the people who hear about it don't get the results which are promised, but a few people will, and then they'll swear by it, and they'll recommend it to everybody they know.
Right.
Most of them won't benefit from it. That's why I really only mentioned one technique in passing, which works for me, and I don't know that it will work for other people, which is simply to try and sort of imagine the version of myself I want to feel like, embody that, which I made up. I don't know where that came from, and it works for me. I think will work is the general approach of, for the most part, letting your feelings be, and then but if they don't work, you let that happen, you let your feelings go where they will, and if they do work, then you take what you can get.
Right. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so I want to see if other people have questions. So if other people have questions, please type them in the chat and or indicate in the chat that you have questions. In the meantime, I also have some questions that I want to ask. So you know that there are a number of scientific, science-based approaches to changing your feelings. For example, one technique is the gratitude diary that has been well studied and research-based for improving your mood. Is that something you know much about? Or is that something you practice? Is that something you can describe for the listeners and viewers?
I have read about that one in particular as one of the most strongly established affect your general mood. I have practiced it. I didn't notice it. I'm not sure if you're supposed to be able to. I don't currently practice it. I know there are lots of other techniques. I know there was an article with a bunch of them, like exerting physical control helped you feel more in control of your emotions. And I also know that there are lots of techniques which have been recommended in the past which were never replicated. Some of which they tried to replicate recently and they found out they don't actually work. Like the old one about on your face, and that will affect your mood, apparently failed to replicate. The journal is pretty well established. Techniques which are recommended have not been so well established, and many of them have failed to replicate.
Excellent. Yeah, so that's very important to know what are some of the science-based approaches. Cool. So gratitude journal and kind of the feeling of strength. There's one of the things I think about when I think about improving mood is also that social engagement generally tends to improve mood. And can you talk about that, if that's something you use or if that's something you think about, and more broadly, the scientific research on social engagement to the extent that you know about that?
Sure, I don't know. It's just about the strongest influence on your mood that you can affect. This is your genes. But second to that is your social situation. Certainly I use it. I mean, social guy. And yeah, I'm certainly happy when I'm with other people that I like being around. I don't think I think as a general approach, people don't realize is it's very much related to the top. The idea is you can't force your emotions into a box to fit the way you like. You can't treat them as something that you can just sort of pick up and move around or force one way or another. But rather the better approach is to learn what they respond to and then give them the environment that they can flourish in, like a healthy social environment and so on. Just be aware that there are going to be predictive negative outcomes. You're not going to have the same mood if you don't have the optimal social situation. At that point, my biggest recommendation would be to either change the environment, or failing that, just remember that since the environment's not optimal, your mood is not going to be optimal, and don't try to force it.
Excellent, thank you. So I see at this stage that Aaron Thama has 2 points / questions that he wants to raise. Let's get to them one at a time. So Aaron, please go ahead, turn off your microphone and share them one at a time.
Okay, thanks. I also just had a third one, but I forgot it again, but maybe it will pop up again. So, okay, the first one is in reference to your example, Hunter, with jealousy. I wonder what you guys think, or even better know, about how reframing works to influence your emotions. Like if something upsets you, that you take a positive perspective on it. I got to that general idea from the alternative to jealousy in the polyamory community, which is compersion. I'm sure if everyone has heard of it. It's being happy for someone else compassionately. And it's, yeah, they sometimes call it the opposite of jealousy. And yeah, and I think if you concentrate on this positive aspect of someone you're interested in being happy with someone else, romantically or sexually, that that may positively overshadow the negative feelings. But I'm not sure. So yeah, that was the first point / question.
Sure, I don't know a lot. I did read a book called Feeling Good, which apparently has the incredible quality that in a study, performed medication at treating depression.
Nice.
Teaches you how to basically give yourself therapy. And it mentioned jealousy and everything else, and the principle I saw throughout the book was to be accurate in your assessment of a situation and your description of it in your own mind. That would make that big of a deal, but apparently that's basically the core of the technique, for us to exaggerate negative qualities in a situation. We are significant other flirting with somebody else, we take it way overboard, and we think, you know, the absolute worst. And apparently, if you'll just remember to describe things in strictly accurate terms. This is what I've observed. These are what it could indicate. I don't know that it indicates any of that. Stop at the level of accuracy rather than taking it beyond that. That will apparently affect your mood pretty strongly, with jealousy as well as with just about everything else.
Cool, thank you for that response. And Aaron, I know you had another question, so please go ahead.
Yeah. In advance, sorry if sometimes I lag in reacting. It's like my computer is really slow right now. Okay. The other question was if, well, it's like a personal emotional problem example of myself right now. And I wonder if anyone has any ideas, suggestions for that, on the emotion of breakup heartache. Quite a challenge.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I know principles, like some of the ones we've already talked about, for example, knowing that your mood will respond to your environment and trying to alter your environment to get to your mood instead of trying to directly affect your mood. Socially, for example, social interaction is just about the strongest thing you can do for yourself at almost any time in your life. I know general principles. I don't have any special expertise working with breakups, which can be a big deal. Kelly here says that distraction is a great thing. I guess I've heard the idea of keeping yourself busy with something too.
One of the things that I think people do is, first of all, the specific strategy that you described of noticing your feelings and describing them clearly is quite helpful. It not only, the crucial thing there is not simply noticing your feelings, but getting distance from them. When you describe them, they become more distanced and seem less powerful. And they are less powerful because you gain that sense of distance. So describing those feelings and knowing what happens is really helpful. Another thing that helps, so that's one point I want to raise. Another thing that helps in general to help yourself feel good in any sort of situation is self-empathy. So extending empathy to yourself, caring for yourself, loving yourself, and that's a general skill of that helps you lift your mood and address especially these sort of challenging emotions that you're experiencing, that anyone is experiencing, just helping yourself feel heard. So that's that's a couple of things I wanted to mention. And I see that Kelly is chatting in the, has a couple of chat things. I want to see if Hunter wanted to respond to anything that I said, and then we'll turn to Kelly to let her share.
Reminded me in your comments that apparently they have found in studies that if you are, this is obvious in retrospect, but it wasn't obvious to me before I heard it, your feelings are actually located in a physical location. You could, in theory, sort of point them out, where you're feeling the emotions of happiness or sadness or whatever. And the study found that if you pinpoint where you're feeling your emotions and what the qualities of those emotions are, whether it's or whatever, this apparently probably in the sense of objectivity and gaining some distance helps people manage their moods better. And I remember reading just recently that, that when you talk about overthinking things, people will often accuse, well, sometimes if you're prone to it, they'll accuse you of overthinking positive feelings, the thrill of performance, something like that. And to an extent, they're right in that engaging the analytical part of your brain distances you from the experience and cheapens it, weakens it. Something you might want to avoid if it's a positive experience. But if it is negative, then your analytical mind to categorize and deconstruct and describe in precise detail your feelings could help you gain that objectivity, which would help weaken those negative feelings.
All right, thank you. So Kelly, did you have some points to add or some of your experience to share? Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Kelly.
Awesome. Hi. I don't know. I feel like I can be very objective about myself, but I'm still very critical. So that's a constant thing that I can't seem to overcome long term. Because I'm always trying to achieve more, strive for more. I have that perfectionist syndrome.
Yeah. What do you mean by you feel like you're doing pretty well at being objective about yourself?
I feel that I can be objective and, like I can distance myself and I know not to be hard on myself, and I know to be compassionate towards myself, and I know different techniques and therapies and things to do and how to locate it in my body and all these things, but it's a recurring cycle that I can't seem to stop. Does that make sense?
I mean, you sound like you know as much as I do. I remember in the book Feeling Good, it did identify perfectionism as one of sort of almost the whole crux, sort of the negative outlook that the book was written to help people alter a bit. It sounds like maybe I know the book recommends throughout the whole thing making that precise, clear, accurate picture of what's going on, how it relates to other things, etc. So the thing that I've always annoyed people doing when they say, this is awful, and I say, well, actually, it's actually quite, it's like this. I see the negative part, yes, but it stops here. It's not quite as high as you're saying. That sort of nitpicky accuracy thing, apparently contributes to actually getting into control of your emotions. If you can sort of do it to yourself. The book is written by one. I might recommend the book to you. It's apparently, I'm astounded that it could treat something like depression as well as medication, but that's what it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I wanted to jump in on this perfectionism, and it's something that I know that a lot of people struggle with. And one of the things that helps people who have the kind of knowledge that we all, that you do, Kelly, and I wonder if it might help you, is to orient toward meta-perfectionism. By that, I mean orienting towards making sure that you don't spend more than the required amount of effort on any project. And because spending more than the required amount of effort will not enable you to succeed overall in the whole variety of projects that you're doing, including in feeling good and having a positive life. So that orientation toward meta-perfectionism, I have found, is actually, for many people, quite helpful who already have a background in the kind of knowledge that you do.
Yeah, I think that's very good advice. Thank you.
I can vouch for that to some extent. When I, growing up, heard about perfectionism, I didn't quite get why it was supposed to be a bad thing. But when I eventually did figure it out, I realized that what I had been thinking when people said, trying to get everything just right, I was really thinking more in terms of meta-perfectionism. I thought everybody was doing what would, in the long run, the greatest possible success, happiness, whatever, which would of course mean piece by piece, letting them instead of focusing too intently on them. So I guess sort of intuitively I've more dealt with meta-perfectionism and haven't ever made my mood negative in any way.
That's good.
Also wanted to mention that we will soon be launching an informal coaching project, so that might be a venue to address some of these experiences for folks on this call. All right. Kelly, did you have any more points to add regarding perfectionism, or other thoughts?
Not really. I mean, the only thing that that I keep thinking about during this discussion is with family and boundaries there. And you can do so much with yourself, but family seems to take liberties that they maybe shouldn't, or where they start to infringe upon each other. And that's another thing that I deal with on a regular basis. Any thoughts there on how to help manage a more peaceful family?
I did not knowing the situation well at all. One person might not be good advice for another. I think that's even
Sure.
probably like there's probably not any one specific thing which would actually work more than half the time. Probably more than half the time it would fail.
Yeah.
I really couldn't say anything specific with just what I know. In general, I've found there's a certain power to being open and clear. There's often that just on the other side of an awkward conversation is a step forward in a relationship. Held back by the fact that it's a bit awkward, nerve-wracking even, to talk about something new with somebody or to get something out in the open. But once you can do so, things generally proceed better from there. Things understanding precedes correction, in my experience.
So let me share some thoughts as well from my experience. And Aaron, I know, also wants to share some thoughts, so we'll get him to share his thoughts in a bit. From my experience, I think a really important thing that I find very useful is the concept of locus of control. So, and that's definitely an important research-based concept, focusing on what you can do or what I can do, not on what others are doing, and seeing myself as doing well as when I do the things that I believe are the optimal, that are under my locus of control, and that I can't control others, and not to feel like I'm responsible for the emotions of others or their beliefs, their outcomes. So trying to do the best I can, and that is what I see as has really helped me, and I know a lot of others, manage challenging interactions in family life, in social circles, and all sorts of relationship dynamics. So wanted to bring that up. And I know Aaron also had some thoughts, so let's, please, Aaron, would you share your thoughts? And then we'll let Kelly have a turn.
Okay, I think now I'm on air.
You are.
Right? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, principally, I already said what I wanted to say, but it seems like Kelly hasn't heard of the concept yet, because Kelly, you seem to interpret it literally. But I tried to indicate by the title case, capital letters, that this is a specific concept. It's quite popular, and it's much more complex than just abstaining from violence. Also, more specifically, it's not just about physical violence, but NVC has a very broad concept of violence, which, as far as I remember, even includes praise. Maybe because when you sometimes praise, then the other times when you don't praise is like a punishment in relation. And yeah, NVC tries to not punish things, so that everything is really free.
Yes. So just, Aaron, the audience may not be able to see the chat. So you were talking about nonviolent communication, the concept of nonviolent communication.
Right.
Yeah, and that there's a book by that name which people can pick up on Amazon. It's a quite useful way of engaging with people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Should also be no problem finding resources on that online. I think the gist of it is rather short. then probably there can be a lot you said about the details and factors and everything. But in principle, it's 4 steps, which include expressing needs and making requests, and which do not include interpretations or accusations. Yeah, so I think it's can be pretty useful for family fights, family conflicts in particular, which tend to be quite emotional and yeah. Okay, that's that.
And thank you, Aaron. Kelly, would you want to have some responses to these thoughts? Were they helpful?
It's something I've been studying for a long time. I think it's just circumstantial and something I'll have to continue to plow through. And just do the best I can with what I have.
That's a good strategy.
If it does seem that, I don't know your situation. I don't know if pursuing mutual understanding is really sort of what things are going to hinge on in this circumstance. Are trying to pursue understanding before correction. I mentioned over here something called street epistemology, which is really only connected in a roundabout way. It's a way to talk to people about deeply held beliefs and help them consider whether or not they're held for good reasons or not. Interesting things about it is that conversations about deeply held beliefs and whether or not people hold them for good reasons are like the classic example of things that get heated, people get defensive. It's, the list of things you're never supposed to talk to at work or at the dinner table, exactly that kind of thing. And people who have street epistemology talks talk again later, but often they'll even recommend other people have a similar talk. It's just incredibly effective at just being able to talk to people in a non-confrontational, open style. Examples of it on YouTube I know, where it's really something to see how much more open and agreeable and honest people can be when they're being when they feel when there's no confrontation involved.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Cool, thank you. All right, so Aaron has another point. So please bring it up, Aaron.
Okay, thanks. Well, in fact, I've got 3. One is meta communicational here. I suggest I just leave my mic on from here on because it's because of my CPU so troublesome to turn it on quickly. And you let me know if you hear any noises from my computer or whatever, and then I'll turn it off. Okay. First, about the street epistemology thing, Hunter, did I understand correctly that it's a technique? And if so, could you sum it up?
Sure. The technique is largely based on Socratic questioning, which, was famous for being used to show people why they were wrong about things.
Right.
Seeing people use it in a contemporary environment is that if people are wrong, then yeah, this is a great way to help them look at that without it being confrontational or them having to feel defensive. Right technique, using the kind of Socratic questioning, it's a great way to simply understand somebody, understand what they believe, precisely why, how much, how they came to it, what would change their mind, this kind of thing. Great way to get them to see that. If they're right, it's a great way for you to come to understand how and why somebody is right, or at the very least understand what they feel, what they think.
Cool. So have you already said how that Socratic questioning goes? Is it basically asking why they believe the things they believe and what would change their mind?
Right. There are a number of questions which sort of help you get a feel for the shape of a person's belief. For example, if you ask, what would get them to change their mind? The answer is something that their belief really hinges on. Sometimes we support our belief, but if they weren't the way that they are, we wouldn't change our minds. Those things aren't actually determining what we believe or what we feel. Whereas if it's something that will change our mind or our feelings, that's what everything's really hinging on.
Mm.
A clear idea of that aspect of their belief. There are how strongly you believe something, how much of that feeling comes from this, how much of it comes from that. Examples. I won't give you the whole list of questions I've seen used, but you can look it up. I know there are a lot of videos on YouTube of people using these.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, sounds very psychological. I like that. Yeah. I've got another point which is quite independent of what we have been talking about the last minutes. So if someone else wants to jump in between, that's fine.
Does anyone else have something that relates to the questions that were recently talked about before Aaron shifts to a different point? All right, I don't see anyone in the chat, so please go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, sure. So this one is not a question, but I remembered something that seems quite relevant here that I would like to share with you. It's first relating the validity of the source. It's what my psychotherapist in the clinic I have been to recently taught, if you will. So it is, I guess, pretty scientific, but I wouldn't like perfectly vouch for it. She's super competent. She's the best psychologist I've ever met, but I'm not perfectly sure that everything she does is like perfectly researched. I think most of it is, but maybe sometimes she also goes by experience, which I think works well, but I don't know. Maybe it depends on other things that are not the case with everyone. So, yeah, your mileage may vary. Relating to dealing with negative emotions, she suggested, and this is similar to, I think, to what Hunter already said, but maybe in somewhat different words. She said one should accept the emotions and, well, consciously feel them, and then after some time they will just fade away, and as opposed to trying to ignore them or distract oneself from them, because then they will not actually be like used up, if you will, but they stay in the part of the brain that she actually named, but I forgot, maybe it was the amygdala, or I think it was the almond core, of course. Anyways, and yeah, so it stays there and it does its mischief until it's been dealt with. So yeah, that was that.
That sounds similar to what I've heard in studies, as well as not with quite the same support, except to what degree the study concept in mindfulness meditation. What you said, it almost sounds almost exactly like, I know someone named Sam Harris talked about it, for example. He talked about how our emotions, we observe them, but we are not our emotions. In which the emotions have been cast, but the emotions, the mirror simply sort of experiences them. And he said, if you think you can feel a certain emotion for more than a couple of minutes, to renew it by reimagining the experience behind it, then he said you just He says he thinks you're just not right. Just feel the emotion instead of replaying where the emotion came from. It won't last for longer than a couple of minutes unless you think it back up again and get.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I also want to add, yeah, my therapist also put a number on it. She said, I think half an hour, like even very strong emotion will not last longer than half an hour if you just let it be there. And indeed, I also wanted to add what you already said, that she said that, yeah, that only is the case if you don't renew the emotion, yeah, by maybe delving on the source. Yeah, you expressed that pretty well.
I'm pleased to hear that it has a psychologist behind it as well. The guy I heard it from is a neuroscientist, but that's not the same thing. So.
Scientists are the same.
All right, folks. Are there any last questions for Hunter?
It's not a question, but I wanted to reinforce my earlier feedback. I think your presentation, I mean, the content, but definitely also the way how you presented it. I think you're very good at that. It was very likable and watchable. Yeah, I really liked it. It was very good, I think.
I'm
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you for. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, Aaron. So, Hunter, over to you for last thoughts before we finish off.
I think I've said everything. I maybe just like to emphasize what I've tried to emphasize several times in my talk. Yes, I'm saying it's a good idea to take some degree of responsibility for our feelings and try to affect it, but if you accidentally try to force them more than they can really go, you hurt yourself a lot more. Of caution and push them not quite as far as you could get them to go. Yes, take away that if you're not trying, you can make a difference in your emotions by trying. My biggest recommendation and the change that made the biggest difference in my life, go instead of trying to control it even more.
All right. Thank you so much, Hunter. This was great. And like Aaron, I also think your presentation was awesome and really, really good. So thank you so much. And check out more of Hunter Glenn's posts on intentionalinsights.org and other content that helps you improve your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to reach your goals and help also make better decisions for our society as a whole to avoid catastrophic risks and all sorts of problems. Thank you all. And till next time, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Glenn. Thank you.